Morning.
Okay, morning, Harvey. I'm going to start now with the sponsors and hope that the other guys get on as soon as they can. Okay? Year of Learning, Dr. Paul Koningsberg, in memory of his brother, Dr. Sam Koningsberg, Shimon Ruven ben Labish, and Ed Goldberg's cousin, Nisan Hara Nisan ben Fardosa. Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of their dear friend Julian Smith, Yehuda ben Yisrael. Malka Mann, in memory of her family murdered in the Holocaust. Rav Tzvi Hirsch ben Shlomo Yaakov. Sarah bat Ephraim. Yisrael David ben Rav Tzvi Hirsch. Ephraim ben Rav Tzvi Hirsch. Adia bas Rav Tzvi Hirsch. Miriam bas Rav Tzvi Hirsch. Pesel bas Rav Tzvi Hirsch. Shalom ben Rav Tzvi Hirsch. Shlomo Yaakov ben Rav Tzvi Hirsch. Shmuel ben Harav Tzvi Hirsch. Many friends of Dr. Marvin Blush, Moshe Shalom ben Yitzchak Halevi, friends of Toby Paris, Saratova bat Yisrael Dov, friends of Malka Levi, Malka bat Yosef, friends of Avi Gidler, Avrameir ben Shimon, Cheryl Sher, her children and grandchildren, in memory of her uncle, founding member of BRS, Dr. Israel Brook, Yisrael ben Arav Akiva, Marsha Federbush and family, in memory of her husband, Dr. Oriel Paul Federbush, Oriel ben Harav Shimon, friends of Joe Wolf, in memory of Yosef ben Chaim. A month of learning by Adina and Michael Kirshner, in memory of their parents, Florence and Nathan Kirshner, and friend Harriet Friedman. Tova and Leo Zimmer, in memory of her mother, Henya bas Rabero, and her father, Aaron ben Yosef Mordechai. Perry and Jill Meltzer, in memory of his mother, Malka bas Baruch, and his sister, Goldalea bas David Halevi. Carol and Josh Sanborn, in memory of her father, Yehoshua Shia ben Moshe Yehuda HaKohen. Stanley Presser, in memory of his mother, Leah bas Yehuda, his mother-in-law, Golda bas Avram, and his wife, Ruchel Mincha bas Moshe. Ruth Burian and Judy and Edward Boehm, in memory of Ruth and Judy's mother, Hadassah bas Azriel Zelig Miriam, and Father Yitzchak ben Yosef for Esther. Have a week of learning sponsored by Harry and Myra Wild, in memory of his father, Shraga bas Yecheskel, and by Mark and Catherine Linder, in memory of his father, Chaim ben Yecheskel Elimelech. Today being the 8th of February, it's a day of learning plus Torah Fund, sponsored by Judy and Jack Schiff, in memory of her mother, Chaya Chava bas Menachem Mendel. We also have a day of learning today, sponsored by Paula and Bob Bromberg, in memory of her grandfather, Chaim ben Raphael, by Rhoda Mashiach, in memory of her mother, Sarah Leah bat Yosef David, and her father, Noach ben Moshe Chaim. Right. And may the Neshamas have an Aliyah, Krank Rafia, Velti Yeshia, Rosh Matliya, and L'chol B'nai Yisrael, a good gebenched Yar.
Amen.
Okay. All right. Okay, it may take a bit before those guys get on. Okay. Okay, so we finished up in the bottom of Ayin Chet, Amud Beis, with this story, okay? There, Rabbi Yochanan saying a situation could be interpreted based on the Rabbanan, right? Okay, and this issue of people coming, whether it's Tzibur, Yachid, things like that. And then we went on to the top of Ayin Tet, okay? We said, V'bayat ema, if you want, Rav de Amar, Rabbi Yehoshua, right? Detanya Rabbi Yehoshua Omer, Kol hazvachim shebetorah, ben shenitma basar, v'chalav kayam, ben shenitma basar kayam, zorek et hadam. Okay? So we could say that basically Rabbi Yeshua held that regardless of what the korban was, okay, whether it was korban Pesach or otherwise, okay, you could, okay, so long as there was either, excuse me, either the meat or the fat, okay, in existence, one could sprinkle the blood. Okay? So that's sort of where we left off yesterday. Right? So Gemara, as we continue now, most of this Amud, okay, we're going to see a whole variety of examples and issues being raised. Okay? Is that appropriate to say, so long as at least some part of the korban, okay, because remember, it was Rabbi Yoshua who said you needed both. You needed the korban and the dam to be able to sprinkle, okay? So if we're saying that at least some part of the korban is in existence, that would seem to be acceptable, whether it's the fat or the, let's say, Evarim. So it doesn't have to necessarily be a korban where, let's say, Kohanim or the Baalim could eat from it. Okay? So if that's the case, we're now ready to continue, okay, with other examples that the Gemara is going to present to us. And that's what we're going to see. Okay? So we're going to start today with Nazir v'oseh Pesach. Okay? So that's about 4 lines down. So as the other guys hopefully join in, they'll pick up. Okay? So let's say it's a Nazirite, and he has to bring his Korban Pesach. And what's the status? V'oseh Pesach, okay? Nitma, chelev, ubasar kayam. Okay? The meat is tameh, and the fat is tameh, and the meat exists. Now remember, what's unique about the Nazir is that he must eat from part of that korban as well. Okay? And what happens is this statement, zoreket hadam, that it's permissible to sprinkle the blood. Okay? So at least some part of the korban is, let's say, is viable, and therefore that would follow appropriately what Rabbi Yoshua was saying. Okay? Right? We're about 4 or 5 lines down, Zev, on the top of the Amud.
Thank you.
Okay, nitma basar v'chelev kayam. If the meat was tameh and the fat was in existence. Okay? Now remember, we said the Nazir has to be able to eat from the meat. In this case, we're told, ein zoreket hadam. One cannot sprinkle the blood. So does this seem to negate what Rabbi Yoshua had said before? Because we got the impression that so long as some part of the korban was available, even if it wasn't edible, one could sprinkle. Okay? But here it's saying that the chelev is available, but it says it can't sprinkle. Ve'im zarak hurtza. But if it was done after the fact, it's acceptable. Okay? So again, that would come back to tell us the chatchila. Rabbi Yoshua felt you really did need both being viable. Okay? Either the fat or the offering itself, the meat, okay? And the blood. Now, another example. Nitma'u haba'alim b'met. The owners who brought the animal became tamei mace. Lo yizrok. One cannot sprinkle. Ve'im zarak, lo hurtza. And if one did sprinkle, in that case, it's not acceptable. Okay, given our line of reasoning, why is that the case? Again, the owners of the Korban Pesach, since they can't eat from it, right? Because it's tamei, they themselves are tamei. Okay, that would therefore, wouldn't that be sufficient then that it had the blood? The answer would be no. And that's why it can't be sprinkled. And even if it were, it's not acceptable. Now, we get to a new piece from the Mishnah. Okay? About 8 lines down. B'mukdashin eino chen. We said that in regards to the other kinds of offerings, right? It would be, you didn't seem to need both parts, both offering and blood. Matnit mani. If that's the case, asks the Gemara, according to whom is our Mishnah? Rabbi Yoshuahi. It seems to be, suggests the Gemara initially that it's Rabbi Yehoshua. The Tanya, as Rabbi Yeshua taught, was taught in a Braita, Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Kol hazvachim shebetorah, shenishtayer mehen kezayet basar, or kezayet chelev. All the other offerings in the Torah, so long as there remains, in other words, we have in existence at least a kezayis of the meat or a kezayis of the fat, zoreket hadam. One can sprinkle the blood. However, the Braita continues, kechatzi zayet basar. If we have only a half a kezayis of the meat, ukechatzi zayet chelev, and a half kezayis of the fat, ein zoreket hadam. We cannot sprinkle the blood, which would seem to imply that the two halves cannot be joined to be considered adequate enough to say there's an amount of the korban available to go along with the blood to be able to sprinkle. Okay. Now Gemara picks up. Afilu kechatzi zayet basar, ukechatzi zayet chelev. Even when we have a half a kezayis of the meat and a half kezayis of the fat, zoreket hadam mipnei shekula kalil. Okay. So what about, he says, ube'olah, right? When we have the unique situation, the exception of halves, when we're talking about a totally burnt offering, there, even when we have half an olive of meat and half of olive of fat, there you can burn. There you can sprinkle the blood, mipnei shekula kalil, because it's entirely burnt up. In other words, in that situation of the olah, since you're combining to make the korban, the fat and the meat, so therefore he's saying that that's acceptable in terms of sprinkling. Okay. Now, going on, uba mincha, and in regarding a meal offering, afal pi shekula kayemet, even though we say you have the whole amount. In other words, you have the kamitza, and then you have some left over as well. So wouldn't that be the whole amount? Lo yizrok mincha. One cannot sprinkle the blood associated with that mincha. Maya vidita, what is then to do? Okay. Amar Rav Papa, says Rav Papa, minchat nisachim. We're talking about the mincha offering that was a libation. Okay. It went along with, it was brought along with other offerings. Salka da'atach amina. It's possible then I might have thought and said, Kevan de ka'acha mikoach zevach, since it comes along with the power, the authority of another offering, kigufe de zevach dami, that minchat nesachim is like the other offering itself. Kamash malan comes to teach us that that's not the case. Therefore, we now get to another case, another example. Chelev minalan. How do we know, now asks the Gemara, that when we have some of the fat available, it's acceptable, it's enough, it's sufficient, to then say that's enough of the korban to be able to be sprinkling the blood? Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Mishum Rabbi Yishmael, the following, Umatu, it's been determined by Mishum Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, in the name of the authority of Rabbi Yoshua ben Chananya, the Amar Kra, who bases it on a pasuk. V'hiktir hachelev l'reach nichoach l'Hashem. Okay, that he offers the fat as a pleasant aroma to Hashem. Chelev af al pi she'ein basar. That tells us that it's the fat, even though it's not along with the meat. Now, says the Gemara, if that's the case, ashkechan chelev, I have found an adequate proof, let's say, that fat by in and of itself is enough of the korban, along with dam, to be able to sprinkle, right? Yoteret hakaved, ushte klayot. In other words, those other parts of the avarim, right? Be it the diaphragm or the kidneys. What if I only have those and I don't have any of the fat? Minalan. On what basis? Heicha amrinan, right? Dizrakinan. How can we say then that it's possible to sprinkle? Midikatani ubam mincha. Since we teach with this meal offering, af al pi shekula kayemet lo yizrog. Even though we say it's all together, there we said it, we can't sprinkle. Minchahu delo, says the Gemara. It was the mincha offering where we said no. Aval yoteret hakaved ushte klayot shapir dami. But in regards to the diaphragm or the kidneys, the two kidneys, which are other part of the avarim that are right, shapir dami, that's well done. That's acceptable.
Rabbi.
Yes.
I thought the kaved was the liver. I see Archibald says diaphragm, but.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. It could be the part of the internal organs that are connected. Diaphragm, that whole area, that whole section. Okay. I was a little surprised too that they recorded a diaphragm, but that's also what Koren had as well.
Really?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Today could read his liver.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Okay. That reminds me of a story that when my brother-in-law first went to Israel, when he studied in yeshiva, and he went to the butcher shop, he asked for a piece of kaved. Okay. And the butcher laughed at him, right? Okay, because it thought he was a piece of heavy, right? Manalan, asks the Gemara, how do we know that these are acceptable? Rabbi Yochanan Dideyama. Rabbi Yochanan himself said it as follows. Amar Kra, based on the pasuk, L'reach nichoach, that it's done for a nice odor. Kol she'ata ma'aleh l'reach nichoach. Anything that you put up onto the mizbeach for the purpose of a pleasant odor. So the Gemara continues and tells us, V'itztarich l'michtav chelev, and it was necessary to write the fat. V'itztarich l'michtav reich nichoach, and it was necessary to write and cite the example of pleasant odor. De'ikatav rachmana chelev, because had the Torah only written chelev, hava amina chelev, I would have said chelev yes in yoteret hakaved ushtei klayot lo. Okay, the diaphragm and the kidneys no. Katav rachmana l'reich nichoach, and so the Torah wrote pleasant odor. Ve'i katav rachmana l'reich nichoach, and had the Torah only written again pleasant odor, hava amina kol ha'olin l'reich nichoach, I would have thought anything that goes up onto the mizbeach for a pleasant odor, va'afilu mincha, and even the meal offering, katav rachmana chelev, and therefore the Torah wrote chelev, that it had to be fat. Okay? And that finishes that sugya. Now, our new Mishnah, okay, since we talked about issues of being impure, right, tuma, it's going to raise that as a topic. Nitma kahal, o rubo. Okay, so now, remember we've said that if the Korban Pesach, okay, became tameh, if the community is tameh, since it has to be brought at an appointed time, it is permissible to go ahead, okay, and do so. So now clarifying, this Mishnah tells us, if the community was tameh, or the majority of the community, o shahayu kohanim tmehim, or the kohanim were tameh, v'hakal tahorim, and the community was tahor, ya'asu b'tum'ah, they will offer the Korban Pesach in impurity. Nitma mi'ut kahal, if only a minority of the community was tameh, right? What happens then? Hatahorin osin et harishon, those who are tahor carry out their Korban on the first, namely on the appropriate date of the 14th of Nisan, okay? Vatmein osinet hasheni, and that minority group that is tameh have to wait and bring their Korban Pesach on Pesach Sheni.
Does that apply? Does that apply to the Kohanim too? If there is a minority of Kohanim that are tahor?
Good question. Okay, let's see if the Gemara raises that question or gives us an answer.
All right.
Because this Mishnah seems to be very brief. Okay? And as we could come up with other scenarios like you just raised. Okay? What happens, for example, if the group is half and half?
Right.
What happens if the group, if let's say the community, okay, in other situations? And those are the kinds of questions the Gemara is going to raise for us. Starting off, Tanu Rabbanan, says the Braita, Harei shahayu Yisrael tmein, v'kohanim uklei sharei tahorim. Let's say that the community of Jews is tameh, but the Kohanim and the utensils are tahor. Or perhaps Shahayu Yisrael Tahorim, that the community was tahor, v'kohanim uklei sharet tmeim, and the kohanim and the utensils are the ones that are tamei. Va'afilu Yisrael v'kohanim tohorim, or maybe even the Israelites and the kohanim are tahor. Uklei sharet tmeim, and the utensils for carrying out the avoda are tamei. Ya'asu betum'ah, says this Braita. The Korban Pesach should still be done in a state of impurity. She'ein Korban Sibur Chaluk, because a communal offering is not divided, it's not separated. Now, Amar Rav Chisda, says Rav Chisda as follows. Okay? Lo shanu ela shidnit mahasakin b'tamei meit. That was only taught when in a situation where the knife, okay, was impure because of contact with a corpse. The Rahmana Amar, why? Because the Torah says, B'chalal cherev, like the sword of a, contact, corpse contact. Cherev, arehu kechalal. Namely, because the sword assumes the same status of tuma as the chalal, as the corpse. Right? V'ka mitame legavra, and therefore it conveys tuma to the person. The mi'ikara ki mitabid. Why? Because originally, okay, when the avoda was taking place, ki tum'at haguf, the karet kamit abed, because in that situation, okay, his tuma, his impurity of his body, is going to result in a punishment of karet if and when he carries out the avoda. Aval mitma hasakin betumat sheretz. But if the knife had become tameh from a lesser degree of tuma, say that of contact with a sheretz, de basarhu de metame le, because then using that knife renders the meat tameh, but not necessarily the person. Okay? Legavra lo metamya le, but the person himself is not rendered tameh. Tohorin avid. Okay? Then, okay, the persons are tahor, and what they can carry out the avoda. Tme'in lo avid. But those who are tameh cannot carry it out. So therefore the Gemara tells us, mutav ye'achel betumat basar belav. It's better then that one eat the, in this case, Korban Pesach, where the meat itself is what is tameh, even though there's a prohibition. Va'al ye'achel basar betumat haguf shehu b'karet, and not eat the meat in a condition, in a status of tuma, when it's the person who is tameh, where that is punishable by kares. Alma, therefore, kasava Rav Chisda. Rav Chisda then is of the view, tuma dichuyahi b'tzibur, that it must be that the status of impurity is pushed off in regards to a communal offering. V'chein amar Rabbi Yitzchak, and likewise says Rav Yitzchak, tum'ah dichuyahi b'tzibur, that the status of impurity is pushed off in regards to a communal offering. Now, the Rava Amar, however, Rava says, Afilu tmein nami avde. Even when the people are tameh, we still carry out the avoda. My tama, what's the reasoning? Dichtiv, because it's written in a pasuk. Vahabasar asher yiga b'chol tameh lo yechel ba'esh yisaref. Vahabasar kol tahor yechel basar. Namely, how do we understand the pasuk? Kol hecha delo karinen bay. Namely, the pasuk has two parts, and wherever we apply, and we read the fact that and apply the situation, vahabasar asher yiga b'chol tameh lo ye'achel, that where the impure is not able to eat it, lo karinen bay vahabasar kol tahor yochal basar. We don't apply as well the fact that the pure are able to eat. Kol hecha, the karinen bay, wherever we do apply then the first part of the pasuk, where it says, Vahabasar asher yiga b'chol tameh lo ye'ochel, where the impure are not able to eat, karinen bay, vahabasar kol tahor yochel basar. There we do apply that the tahor are able to eat. Now, itmar, about this the following was said. Harei shahayu Yisrael mechza tahorin umechza tmein. What about the situation where the community of Israelites is half tahor and half tameh? Rav amar mechza al mechza kirov. Rav says half and half is like the majority. But Rav Kahana amar mechza al mechza eno kirov. And Rav Kahana says when it's half and half, you don't have a majority. Now, Rav amar mechza al mechza kirov. When Rav says that half and half, you have a majority, halalu osin la'atzman, v'halalu osin la'atzman. These do it for themselves, and these do it for themselves. V'Rav Kahana amar, and Rav Kahana says, mechza al mechza eno karov, that half and half is not a majority. Namely, tahorin osin et harishon, those who are pure do it on the, let's say, first Pesach, utmein osin et hasheni, and those who are tameh wait and do it on Pesach Sheni. So the Gemara asks, Ika da Amre. However, there are those who explain it this way. Amar Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana says, so this is a second lashon for Rav Kahana, explaining his view, that he said something else, namely, mechza al mechza eno karov, still that half and half is not a majority, tahorin osin et harishon, that those that are pure do it on the first Pesach, right? And now we flip over, utmein, and those who are impure, ein osin, they don't bring a korban Pesach, lo et harishon v'lo et hasheni, neither on the first Pesach nor on the second. Berishon la avdei, on the first they don't do it, the lo havu ruba, because there wasn't a majority. B'sheni lo avdei, on the second they don't do it, the lo havu miuta, because they weren't a minority. So the Gemara now picks up and says, hold on a second. Tznan, we learned in a Mishnah, nitma kahal o rubo. If the majority of the community became tameh, the whole community or the majority, o shahayu kohanim tmeim v'hakahal tahorim, or that the kohanim were tameh and the community was tahor, Ya'aseh b'tumah. That was our Mishnah. Okay, that they should still carry it out in a status of being impure. Rubo hu da'avde b'tumah. The majority does it in a status of tumah. Aval palga al palga. But half and half, lo avde b'rishon, they don't do it on the first Pesach. Kasha l'Rav. That's problematic for Rav. Amar lach Rav. Rav, however, would argue and answer you the following. Ruba avde kulhu batuma. When there's a majority, excuse me, we carry it out, we do it, everyone does it in a status of being tameh. Palga upalga. When it's half and half, Rav is going to argue, halalu osim la'atzman, v'halalu osim la'atzman. These do it for themselves, and these do it for themselves. Hachanami mistabra. And here too, this seems logical. The Katani Sefer, because we're taught at the end of our Mishnah, Nitma mi'ut hakahal. If only a minority of the community became tamei. Tohorin osin et harishon. Those who are pure do it on the first Pesach. Tmein osin et hasheni. And those that are tamei do it on Pesach Sheni. Mi'utu the avde b'sheni. It's where the minority does it on Pesach Sheni. Aval palga upalga lo avde barishon. Okay? But if it's half and half, no. Okay? Va'avde barishon. Okay? And when they do it on the first, v'halalu osin la'atzman, v'halalu osin la'atzman. And were they to do it on the first Pesach, these do it for themselves, and these do it for themselves. If that's the case, says the Gemara, ve'ele kasha l'Rav Kahana, then that's problematic for Rav Kahana's view. Now, Rav Kahana would answer, v'amar lach Rav Kahana, the following, nitma'u mi'ut hakahal. When we say a minority of the community became tamei, tahorin osin et harishon. There the pure ones do it on the first Pesach. Utmein osin et hasheni. And those that are tamei do it on Pesach Sheni. Ha, palga upalga. But, he says, when it's half and half, tahorin osin et harishon. Those who are tahor do it on the first Pesach. Aval tmein, but those that are tamei, einan osin lo et harishon v'lo et hasheni. They don't bring the korban Pesach either on the first Pesach or on the second. So the Gemara says now in response, Hatenach l'lishna batra de Rav Kahana. That's acceptable for the later language, the later citation of Rav Kahana. Ela lahach lishna. But to this language, to the earlier language, the Amar Rav Kahana, where Rav Kahana had said, Tahorin osin et harishon, utmein osin et hasheni, where in that earlier language of Rav Kahana, he had said that those that are tohor do it on the first Pesach, and those tamei on the second. My ikala meimar, what are you going to say? So now the Gemara has to come up and tell us. Amar lach Rav Kahana. In that instance, Rav Kahana would answer the following. Hu hadin da afilu palga upalga nami. But that is the law. In other words, that's the reasonable approach, even when half and half also. Tahorin osina tarishon, that those that are pure do it on the first Pesach, utmein osina tasheni, and those that are tameh do it on the second. So the Gemara tells us, V'hai dekatani miuta kahal, but where it was taught that in regards to the minority of the community, Aide detana resha rubo, and where it was taught, okay, in our Mishnah, that it taught initially at the beginning of the Mishnah, that it dealt with the situation of a majority, just for literary purposes, Tananami, Seifa Meuto. Therefore, it also taught at the end of the Mishnah in regards to a situation of minority. Now, the Gemara says, hold on a second. Tanya Kavate de Rav. We have another Braita that seems to teach and support the view of Rav. Tanya Nama Kavate de Rav Kahana. We also have a Braita that seems to teach, according to Rav Kahana, Ketrei Lishne, okay, like the two different versions of Rav Kahana. Tanya Kavate de Rav, a Braita teaches according to Rav, namely, Hayu Yisrael Mechza Tahori, if the Israelites were half Tahor, Umechza Tmeim, and half were Tameh, Halalu Osin La'atzman, V'halalu Osin La'atzman. These do it for themselves, and these do it for themselves. Tanya Kilishna Kama de Rav Kahana, and a Braita that teaches according to the first language of Rav Kahana. Harei Shahayu Yisrael, Mechza Tahorinu Mechza Tmeim. If it was that the Israelites were half pure and half tameh, Tahorin Osina Tarishon, that those that are tahor do it on the first Pesach, Utmein Osina Tasheni, and those tameh do it on Pesach Sheni. Now the Gemara continues, however, Vitanya Kilishna Batra de Rav Kahana, and the Braita also teaches like the later language of Rav Kahana. Harei Shahayu Yisrael Mechza Tahorinu Mechza Tmeim, where it's such that the Israelites were half Tahor and half Tameh. Tahorino Sina Tarishon, those that are Tahor do it on the first Pesach. Utmein Einan Osin, and those that are Tameh don't do it. Lo et Harishon v'lo et Hasheni, neither on the first Pesach nor on the second Pesach. Now, the Rav, according to Rav, V'lalishna Batra de Rav Kahana, and the later language of Rav Kahana, Ha Detana Tahorin Osina Tarishon, where it teaches that the pure ones do it on the first Pesach, Utmein et Hasheni, and the others and the impure do it on the second Pesach. Hechi mitartzela. How can we explain that? Kigon, in other words, how can we answer that? Kigon shahayu Yisrael, mechza tahorin umechza tmeim. It's a situation where the Israelites are half tahor and half tameh. V'nashim mishlemot l'tmeim. And the women then they complete the number of people that are tameh. Ukisavar, and therefore we must be of the opinion, nashim berishon reshut, also that in terms of women Okay, as regards to the Pesach, first Pesach, that's not obligatory for them to participate in the Korban Pesach. So what happens? Dal nashim mitmein, reduce the women from the number of individuals that are impure. Vahavu laho tmein meuta. Then the number of those that are impure is a minority. Umiuta yidchu Pesach sheni. And the minority then is pushed off to do their korban on Pesach Sheni. Continuing, says the Gemara, L'Rav v'Lishna Kama, the Rav Kahana. According to Rav and the earlier language of Rav Kahana, Hadatanya, here where it's taught in the Braita, Tohorin Osinat Harishon, that those that are Tohor do it on the first Pesach. Utmein ein osin lo et harishon v'lo et hasheni, and those that are Tameh neither do it on the first Pesach nor on the second. Hechi mitard sela. How is it possible to explain this? So we see Rav mitaretzla. Rav is going to explain it as follows. Hold on. Kigon shahayu Yisrael, mechzet mein, umechzet tahorin. It's a situation where the Israelites, half are tameh and half are tahor. V'nashim odfot al hataharim. And the women are added to the number of those that are tahor, are pure. Ukesavar, and he's of the opinion, nashim birishon chova, that women are obligated in terms of Korban Pesach for the first Pesach. Ubesheni rishut, but for Pesach Sheni, they're not obligated. The Rishon, lo avde, dahavi le miut. On the first Pesach, they don't do it. Why? Because it's part of the minority. Umiuta lo avde berishon. And a minority doesn't do it on the first Pesach. Ubesheni lo avde. And on the second Pesach, they also don't do it. Why? Dal mashiminayu. Remove the number of women from them. Vahavu laho palga upalga. And then we only have half and half. Upalga lo avde b'sheni. And for a half, we can't do it on the Pesach Sheni. So that's Rav's explanation. Ula Rav Kahana, and according to Rav Kahana, the Amar Palga Nami Avde B'Sheni. What about Rav Kahana, who says that for half they can also do it on Pesach Sheni? Hachi Mataritzle. This is how we explain it. Kigon Shahayu Yisrael Mechza Tahorin Umechza Tme'in. A situation where we have the Israelites half tahor and half tameh. V'nashim mashlimot l'tahorim. And the women come to complete the number of people who are tahor. V'kasavar nashim berishon chova. And he's of the opinion that women are obligated on the first Pesach. B'sheni reshut. And women are not obligated, on the second Pesach. Berishon lo avde. On the first, they don't do it, right? Dahavu laho palga upalga. Because there it's only half and half. Upalga b'rishon lo avde. And when it's a half for the first Pesach, they don't do it. B'sheni nami lo avde. And on Pesach Sheni, they also don't do it. Why? Dal nashim minayu. Remove the women from among them. Min hatahorim, from those that are pure. Havalahot mein ruba. As a result, then those that are impure are the majority. Veruba lo avde b'sheni. And the majority doesn't do it, the offering, on Pesach Sheni. Ula Rav Kahana. And as far as Rav Kahana now goes, Hadatanya, Hare Shahayu Yisrael, Mechza Tahorim, Umechza Tmeim. Here, where the Braita says that he taught if the Israelites were half Tahor and half Tomei, Halalu Osin La'atzman, V'halalu Osin La'atzman. These do it for themselves, and these do it for themselves. Hechi matritzla. How do we explain that? Amalach Rav Kahana. Rav Kahana would therefore tell us in this case, Tana'aihi. This is a machloket Tanaim. Right? Ika, Laman de Amar, Mechza al Mechza Karov. Why? Because there are those who say when it's half versus half, there's still a majority. Ve'ika laman amar mechza al mechza eno kirov. And there is those who say when it's half versus half, you don't have a majority. Now, the Gemara comes back and wants to examine the text in more detail. Gufa. Let's examine the following text. Hare shahayu Yisrael, mechza tahori umechza tmeim. We had said that what was the situation when the Israelite community was half tahor and half tamei? Halalu osin la'atzman, v'halalu osin la'atzman. This group does it for themselves, and this group does it for themselves. Hayut mein odfin ala tahori. If those that were impure outnumbered, right, those that were pure, afilu echad, even by one, ya'asu betum'ah, they should do the korban pesach, even in a status of being tamei. Lafisha ein korban sibor chaluk, because we say that a community offering is not separated, it's not divided up. Rabbi Eliezer ben Matya Umer, okay, he disagrees and says, ein hayachid machriya et hatzibur betum'ah, that a single individual can't have a majority of one, okay, to move the community into being considered a majority of being tamei. Shene amar, why, as we just go over a little bit, lo tuchal lizboach et pesach be'echad she'arecha. You cannot, all right, make the offering of Pesach in one, or rephrasing it, by one in your gates. Right? Rabbi Shimon Omer, says Rabbi Shimon, afilu shevet echad tamei, even if it's one tribe, v'shar kol hashvatim tohorim, and all the other tribes are tohor, halalu osim la'atzman, v'halalu osim la'atzman. Okay, these do it for their purpose, and these do it for their purpose. Okay, and that's where we're going to stop for today. Okay, because we'll see why Rabbi Shimon holds the way he does. Right, everybody? Okay.
Have a good day.
So thank you. And
Thank you, Rabbi. Have a
take
good
care.
day. All should be well.
All right. And stay well, everybody.
Thanks.